Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this evening. It can be truly said that there is no need to introduce the speaker, but for those who don't know him, the man on my right is Cedric John Price, architect extraordinary, whose exhibition is on the walls but hasn't been able to be seen because at cocktail parties you can never see exhibitions. But obviously most of you will return, I'm sure, unless something happens in the next half hour which prevents you from doing so or discourages you. Anyway, without further ado, Mr. Cedric John Price.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I know what will happen in the next half hour. With luck, Colin Amory will pen one of those timeless phrases about a tired man of the 60s or something like that, and it'll be published in a paper that I admire in many ways, the Financial Times, and it may persuade you that perhaps to look at an exhibition of work done over the last 25 years is really, in the old phrase, like looking at the deck chair map for the Lusitania. However, the nature of this talk tonight is a puzzle for me, and I would appreciate interruptions as often as possible to help me through bits. I somehow feel that having run an office at a very small size for 25 years, which I might add has not been difficult, unfortunately. Now and again there has been, at the moment we have 4 floors and occupy with great ingenuity about 1.5 of them. Good evening, Christopher. How very nice to see you. Now, that brings me on to an earlier point. I have, in fact, previously, at least 25 years ago, occupied an office with another firm, the actual room, with a gentleman here tonight. And that was very interesting. This is an aside, but it's a good place to start. That was interesting because we shared the most superb sort of office manager come secretary, who also came in this evening. And we didn't do the same sort of work. But surprise, surprise, we did actually use the same sort of reference books. We also used the same sort of postage stamps. And apart from some difficulty I had once with 2 racing pigeons that were sent to me by someone who said they couldn't get in touch with me any other way, we got on reasonably well. And so what occurs to me is that there may be a particular observation, maybe observations capable of being made over the last 25 years by an office such as mine, which are not necessarily general on any societal patterning as observed, but are indicative of a peculiarity which has produced the sort of work on the walls. And if you look at the catalogue, borrow somebody else's, when you bought the catalogue, you find that extraordinarily few people, even for a small office, over 25 years. I've just seen another. And it's the first thing that occurs to me, the first sort of major social change in my office over the last 25 years is the only person who's grown old has been me. That is that the average age, we worked this out, the average age over a 12-month period, over the last 25 years, of staff has been about the same. I have no partners, no old retainers, no wise people who I dust off for the difficult bits. But I've aged. And in aging, I've got to a situation where I'm now going to make these sort of generalizations about various patterns that I've observed, not only in the work that we do and the people who work in the office, but in the way that we, I think it's the phrase Steve Mullen used, glean work. We have never advertised a vacancy. Now, this is not peculiar to architecture. I believe Arg Tharop, who I was delighted to hear is still alive, and gave his last hat box to Queen Mother for her 80th birthday. Not with a hat in it, I think this is rather good, but with a whole series of ribbons made in her favorite blue out of different fabrics, because he felt he couldn't really give her a hat. She might think he was back in business or advertising. And on the other hand, he couldn't just give her an empty hat box, although it was his last. So he gave her the color she liked in as many different fabrics and ribbons as possible. We try and do that now and again. Not with the Queen Mum. Although I would like to point out that this is this new file I have is to placate the wrath of any royalty who's interested in expressing views on my architecture or the architecture in this exhibition. Actually, that's another aside. It's very interesting that the architects get hot under the collar. I must say, I didn't read it, but I have read it since, about the comments by Prince Charles. Now, I can understand the individual authors getting hot under the collar. Great, yes. More than hot under the collar. I can understand them trying to lay one on him. But in general, I think, I would have thought that all one can expect from important people in relation to architecture is cognizance, not content. They should be delighted. I mean, good Lord, he might have talked about Normandy or so, you know, I mean, it's very good. There he was, Hampton Court. So I don't know why it's belly aching about it. I don't think it matters. As I say, it wouldn't be doubtful. What? Now the other thing, I think that there's a relevance in that age operation over and above anything to do with architecture as such. The fact that the only person who actually is asked to comment on the 25 years patterning is the only person who's actually been aged by it. It should actually be all the other people who've worked through the office and left when the going was good, commenting on it, so that there's a more even approach. The same hasn't happened with clients. We have found that clients age terribly quickly. And I must say, it's sometimes a bit of a race, but we try and ditch them first. But it's pretty close at times. And it's also very interesting, there was only one instance where I was about to sack someone. And this was for a repeated sexual misdemeanor. Misdemeanor meaning that the advances weren't welcomed, as opposed to that they were ill-directed or badly engineered. But he sorry to do it, he actually obviously decided that it wasn't much of a place to work anyhow, and he literally ejected in before I sacked him. I can't imagine the use of this tape. I hope it's being transcribed. The thing is, you see, the nice thing about 25 years, what's happening now? Oh. Women and children first. The nice thing about having taped is that it can be transcribed, and as I'm only 49, I can have another sort of thing at the AA, another 25 years' time. It'll be just before being 75, and we could have transcription of these talks, numbered pages, 13 to 7. The other quality, which, as I said in the little chat there, that I find interesting in what the office has done, which never occurred to me until I actually saw what other people make of what it has done, both by producing the book and hanging the thing up, is that there is a staggering sameness. So, Colin Amory, you know, you may be right. Tired man of the 60s. That's really stuck in my throat. I'm not sure if he said it quite as nasty as that, but I reckon it'll stick now. There is a sameness, and it relates largely to the fact that we have found that, try as we may, the only way that we can actually work usefully and with delight, first to delight ourselves, secondly we hope with delight to all the other billions around, the only way we can achieve this, although we would like to alter it, is in this country, is to be, even if you're working abroad, if you're an architect in this country, is to be involved with animals, with fun. Now, that of course has been prescribed, that word, fun, now. We always thought it was a dangerous one, just as we never used the word leisure, but tried to introduce the word pleasure, so that even the unemployment pay could be received under plain cover without you getting out of bed in the morning to get it. That sort of level of not organizing so-called leisure as a sort of hand-down activity, a sort of ordering by the haves of the have-nots, so that they don't really misbehave when they haven't got anything really worthwhile to do, like walking a mile to the pit face and not being paid for the walk, sort of activities, which I know is over now, but not enough. So there's animals, fun, an emergency. That's a good one. They're short of time. You know, a client is someone who comes to in a state of distress. Now, that actually is one of the definitions in the Big Oxford Dictionary. It's worth bearing in mind. They don't let you know at first. I'm being caught. I'm catching Mr. Hopkins' eyes. And the last one, of course, is economy. If people feel that architects can really save them some money, then my word, they are popular people. Now, that of course is the absurd. We try and point out that it's very unlikely we can save anybody any money, but we'll certainly spend a lot of their money very wisely. Now, this hasn't changed, which is a great pity. I would like to think that we have had, over that 25 years' time, it has only been when there's either been an emergency or some sort of loony assumption of immediate economies that we have been associated with the one activity that I find crops up again and again, whatever the year, and that is housing. But in fact, if you look at the housing we've actually built, it is real music hall stuff. It is a gamekeeper's cottage. You know, I mean, and I would recommend you look at the gamekeeper's cottage, because the coloured photographs, the latest coloured photographs, it was built in 1960. The photographs are of as it is now in 1984. Almost impossible to distinguish from how it started out, with just one new client. Have a look at it. Pitched roofs, funny. I mean, very nice. I would be appreciated by those in the know, I think. If we another aspect of which has changed is what, in fact, the office found interesting over and above in what they were doing. Now, there was a time when there was terrific discussions in the office about, I don't think this is just, it may be because I'm getting old, I don't think so. Thank you. There were terrific discussions about getting married or not getting married. This is in the 60s. In the 60s, the swinging 60s. There were long intervals where you couldn't mention associated people in relation to emotional affairs. That things went sort of taboo. It's always been an office that encourages gossip, though I stand back. But allied to this extraordinary sort of 19th century, I would have thought, attitude, which was in fact a 60s attitude, and very zooming types of people they were in the office as well, was another battle of fashion. Now, there are two persons, neither of whom are here tonight, who were exactly the same age, both male, both had the same coloured hair, but dressed in entirely opposite ways. And they did what we used to call in Staffordshire Rodneying. That is, that they would preen themselves in front of each other to sort of, and I remember one when he arrived, and he decided that trousers no longer should have any pockets. That you have open lap seams or something like that, but no pockets in trousers anywhere. And the other one was sprouting, I mean, this was long pre-Vietnam Army surplus. He was sprouting pouches all over him, folded pouches, not with zips, always buttons. Now, this sort of discussion wasn't marginal to what we were doing. It was absolutely central. Because every silly little point that cropped up on whatever particular job we were doing, and this I can remember ran through into the work we did for probably one of the most ideal clients I ever had, and that was Robert Fraser, for the Robert Fraser Gallery. The business of showing that you could be useful, as opposed to refining the thing almost to showing that you hadn't been there at all, became a very central discussion in architectural form. And if I can just ask your, well, no, I'm not going to ask your patience, I would always leave. There was the question of using angles, say metal or aluminium or brass angles, as a means of closing, say, a series of boards, a series of hardwood planks or something like that. Now, whether you used an angle as a closer and supported them some other way, apart from closing them at the ends on the cross grain with the angle, or whether in fact you supported and closed with the angle, i.e. threaded through, screwed through one flange of the angle, I can remember was a very long discussion. Now, this picked up the sort of discussions that Alan Cahoon and others would have here 5 years earlier, where in fact, when he was a critic at the school, there were discussions that if you plastered a wall, you stopped, and this isn't being funny, I mean, I know what he meant. If you plastered a wall, you stopped that plastering on the brick wall just before it met another plane, so that actually you still knew it was a brick wall, although it was a plastered brick wall. At the same time, Stern magazine, which was the most popular magazine in the office, to be replaced a few years later by Nova, was central to these various aspects of really sort of, it was really sort of seminal design discussion, which they drew in the office, as did I, far more from the visual immediacy and acuity of clothes and various, and not really so much clothes, but photographs of clothes, the way the clothes were presented first in Stern, and then, as I say, largely due to Molly Parkin as fashion editor, the work in Nova, was pored over far more than were architectural magazines. In fact, the architectural magazines that illustrated our work, with one exception, there was a scheme illustrated in architectural design in 1959, but apart from after that, it was always the review, which is a bit extraordinary to think of now, or no, perhaps not. Now one thinks of architectural design in its present form. But those magazines, in a way, weren't followed too much. And if you look at what the central elements of the magazines were from the early 60s right up to today, they haven't altered very much. Architectural design in 1963 had a tiny little bit on the assembly of the castings for R. Avery. Now, this was, I think it was after it was finished, but it was a tiny little bit. But it had the most wonderful, enormous spread on Cumbernauld, which, with a fold-out two-colour spread, which in those days was quite something. And it had Geoffrey Copcut's drawings, and that was 63. So that was one of the key issues of architectural design, which was a monthly in that year. In 66, it did a lavish spread, the review having offered a spread and we having refused it, which was rather nice for other reasons. The interesting thing, now this comes back onto the role of small magazines, nothing to do with architecture, but as generators for discussion of what one should really be bothered with. In the early 60s, there were some very apparently dry magazines like Urban Studies, produced by that group in Edinburgh. Now, those magazines would have articles on centrality in relation to retail shopping in the Swansea area. Never actually a city, but the villages up from Swansea. And they would have other things, but they printed work in progress. They actually told you about things that were happening but hadn't finished, and how they were happening, and what was being investigated. And funnily enough, so did the review in those days. So the review actually brought out a three-colour printout on the Avery before the Avery was started. Not architectural design, but the review. However, by 66, we switched allegiances, although the review, to architectural design, who did a lavish thing on the Potter's Think Belt. Alvin's little favourite. Fine, wasn't bad. But they also did the same number of pages on the work, probably for the last 25 years, no, probably for the last 10 years, of Lyons, Israel, and Ellis. And there were lots of schemes there that had, or at least one scheme where Frank Newby, who's always been my engineer, was also the engineer of Lyons, Israel, and Ellis. Now, and had the Commonwealth Medical School, didn't it? What? What? Yeah. What? Wolfson Institute, yeah. I did actually borrow, because the other day Frank Newby at the RIBA read out my very confidential instructions to him on how he should approach the design of a bird containment unit at London Zoo. He read it out. So I have brought along tonight, I don't think you'll be pleased to hear, I have time to read it out, his instructions on how to achieve concrete at the Wolfson Institute that looks as though it had been rough sawn out of very cheap deal planks. Scrub with a stiff bass brush, it says, and all that. So that was lovely. So at the same time these were appearing. What I'm trying to say is that it would appear that there is a certain milieu, and it may be something to do with the actual scale of building, that doesn't appear to change much, or doesn't appear to change very much, perhaps just in relationship to what magazines think worth publishing. In neither of those instances, neither the Think Belt nor the Lyons Israel scheme had any real opportunity, or indeed, and the Think Belt one was masterminded by Robin Middleton, I think, at the time, didn't have much time or inclination to talk about what had gone wrong during the process. It was end product. So you get to 69, and you find in 1969 architectural design printed, again quite lavishly, are non-plan proposals. But it also, I should say, to its credit, printed an enormous thing on East Anglia University by Dennis Laston. Now, if you know well, they're slightly different, too, slightly different. Now, that might mean that it's an awfully good magazine because, oh boy, what a choice. What it also means is that there appears to be a patterning, and I don't want to get sort of Wedgwood Ben-like about the architectural press, but there appears to be a sort of very safe patterning that runs all the way through, right up to the present day. 72, you get an enormous section on designing for survival. Mud huts and being, clear water and things like that, right alongside Centre Pompidou, the two main items. 74, you get the Habitat Warehouse by A, B, and K, which was one of the early forerunners of if you can fold it in one direction, you can probably bend it in the other. And the YRM Hospital, God gracious. God, they're all around tonight. At St John's Wood. One, literally the tin shed, and other, the extremely polished, expensive sepulchre for the third kidney. 1977, you get the Brunel Center, and Frankenstein again, and James Sterling. Well, you did the arcade, right? And then 1981, I finished, this was an aside, by the way. 1981, you get the final collapse of any pretense that there is any particular interest or selection on the part of the producers of magazines, because they threw everything in, including the kitchen sink and a couple of my schemes, and called it British Architects. Now, at the same time, as we went through that, there was another magazine called New Society, which was always putting in things, sometimes written by the editor, I might add. In two instances, and he's not 100 miles away tonight either, in two instances he rewrote my scheme and put a little note at the bottom saying this scheme is based on extensive conversations between the editor and Cedric Price, meaning that he'd rejected what I'd written. For reasons of English, I think, decided in Whitechapel. If in fact those, that's an interesting thing. I don't know, I understand, I may be wrong, I'd like to hear, I understand that the AA library no longer has New Society, or indeed it's no longer available in the where the magazines used to be. Now, it's interesting that, it's either, could be sad or good, but it's interesting that is not, I can remember when the AA had 3 copies of Nova magazine, almost obligatory, that was the fashion magazine, they were there, and they were all pinched and cut up and torn up. I would like to know, and there's going to be plenty of time for discussion, I would love to know what magazines are subscribed to, because it is an aspect of certainly the first 15, if not 18 years of my office's life, enormous dependence on magazines as opposed to newspapers and as opposed to television. There was not discussion which occurs now on what had been on television. Now and again there was discussion about how various aspects of things on television had looked. And one day, someone must tell me who did that Jane series recently, because I thought that was the most wonderful use of television, the photo montage movie. I mean, now, whoever did that, I would like him in my office. I'd like that man, the man who did that serialization of Jane. At the same time, there has run through the office with pretty steadily a very large involvement in teaching on the part of the people who work in the office. This I find, I rather, there have been one or two people in the office who have made a point of saying that they do not want to have anything to do with teaching. I mean, there have been that. But over the years, there's been a large involvement with teaching in their spare time because of the funny hours we run, or convenient hours we run. We pack up at 3. You can pack up at 2 if you start at 7. That also has had less of an effect recently. I have had times when I admit I have had to give a spoon of gin to a baby left in the office. We haven't had much of this recently. But because of these funny hours, I think it has, not just left there, I mean left with some intention of picking it up, I hope. Although once, one Christmas, one baby was left an awful long time. But it was very similar to the other parcels. There does seem to be a nice, that's another sad thing, and it's because I don't know why it is, there hasn't been an evenness. I would like to have had, and if you look at the list, there isn't an evenness. I'd love to have had about 50-50 all the way through the history of the office of men and women. It's tended to be, I suppose, two-thirds to one-third. But at the odd times when it has been even, it really has worked very well. And funny enough, it's even at the moment and is working very well. All this leads me to the next point, and that is parties. Now, the engineering of a party is a favorite architectural trick. First of all, they tend to think up, how shall we draw the invitation? You know, these ghastly sort of half-funny invitations arrive, or sort of smart invitations. Now, I have always pretended I loathe parties. And there's no money for them, and there's no time, and surely they'd be better off having a party somewhere else. This has, of course, resulted in me being the recipient of the most marvelous parties, for which I thank any of you here, the enormous inflatable Cedrics in black rubber that stop the traffic, helium-filled balloons that we get the police round for, a cake with a rhino's tooth that when you pulled it out of the middle brought out a great jet of red, blood-like jam, spectacles that blacked one's eyes, and always on a time, the parties would always appear to occasion when I had sort of said, well, look, tomorrow we're really up against it, you know. The printers have let us down, because we're as good as anyone else in passing the buck, you know. The printers have let us down, the QS is no good, you can never find Frank these days, and all that sort of thing. And that's when the party occurs. And it seems that I think that this has translated, I hope, into quite a lot of our architecture. I mean, I remember looking at the schemes that we have tried, but I won't point out where, you have to spot it. We have tried now and again to introduce an element of the involuntary party spirit into our schemes, almost to the exasperation of many of the clients. As you remember, clients is someone who comes to in a state of distress. We're not really wildly enthusiastic about clients who know what they want. We're even less enthusiastic about clients who think they know what they want. Those are really dangerous ones. To this extent, there is this difference which appears to be a social patterning in relation to, if you look at in London at any rate, in the nature of growth of restaurants, started by very small, very few people, one or two, and the period of time they last. This is nothing about small is beautiful or large, but the patterning of restaurants in response to offering something that hitherto wasn't available has very much to do with almost a finite lifespan of the service they offer, certainly in London. And we have used that again and again in discussion, and sometimes just me sort of saying, I mean, there are great advantages from not having a partner of any sort. Because now and again, I can be, I hope not unpleasant, but I can try a hunch and not necessarily explain just how hunchy it is. I can wrap up a certain amount of conviction, even if I'm a little doubtful. And this, particularly in relation to timing, as to when we stop bothering our concern with a particular aspect, whether it be of materials, of technology, or indeed end product, end response. I don't like the word solution. I don't think, as I say, because it hints that there's a problem. I don't think that architects are involved with problem solving. I think their process is too slow. I think more money or credit cards, good weather, or things like that, or lots more food, that's rather more immediate problem-solving material than architecture. By the time architecture is realized, if they came to you with a problem and you think you've solved that, they've probably got a bigger one in the form of the building you've given them. So this in view, one tries to point out, and this has got a little bit worse recently, but we hope it may pick up. I haven't liked the climate over the last 4 or 5 years in this country in relation to architecture, and in relation to the lack of real appetite in those who are jokingly calling themselves your client. Fortunately, we were able to have experience from something which I'm delighted to announce tonight for the first time as a result of a telegram, has picked up again, and therefore is probably out of date. And that is the generator scheme in America has now revived, I'm assured, by a telegram. I believe it when I get a little bit something more substantial than a telegram. However, there, in fact, it could not have been achieved, what we were doing. You can't have heard it all before. The team we put together for that, we could not have carried as a single architect's firm. This, again, has an interesting aspect. That's what damned the what was it called, the think tank. The idea I mean, other things damned it, but the idea that you could actually do a list of people who would be available to respond and think productively about almost anything that comes along as actually as a finite list of worthies. We tend to put together teams for a particular job. But we're not going to carry them on the payload. In fact, they wouldn't be carried because they're doing other things until that job happens. Now, we've found that the America is far more prepared to accept that situation and to indeed find it sort of productive than this country. And this has nothing to do with private or public clients at all. It's the same right across the board. And I think that has some relevance. I think that has some social equivalent. I mentioned the Edward Heath. Was it Heath think tank? Put it together? No. No? It was you. You put it together. Well, there we are. I mean, that explains it. I hope you realize it was passing out of the door. But there are other aspects, and I think this is the whole nature, for instance, of the attitude. What is very frightening about the present situation, say, of unemployment, over and above the horror of it, and the boredom of it, and the waste of it, over and above all that, is that no one can, that people are frightened to say, "We told you so." People are frightened to say, there has been 30 years when we could have told you that the way a majority of people are treated in order to get, in Church of England terms, a good, honest job, good, honest sweat of the brow, etc., is wasteful and soul-destroying to those people, however much you pay them. So in times of full employment, there could be all the sort of chat about fun time, leisure time, etc., when in fact there is no work. Then you find, you get this awful, 20 years late, all this chat about, educate people to sort of say, hello birds, hello bees, nothing I like better than an old pair of shoes which gets soaked through because I can go and collect mustard plants on, and I don't mind coming home to not much to eat, because brown bread and no butter is fine, because, can I borrow your copy of The Ecologist? All that sort of, it really is monstrous that sort of con comes through yet again. All sides. Now, as you'll see, and as I hope I've hinted at in this talk, and you wait till tomorrow and Friday, we'll see how many of you come back. As an added attraction, I might add, I hear that Molly Parkin, the ex-fashion editor of Nova, is coming tomorrow. But of course there'll be no reference to her then. But if you listen to what I've said tonight, look at the exhibition and look at the book, you'll find that we do take some strength and advantage from making it very difficult for other people to understand what the hell we're about. Now and again I get criticized by odd members of the press, but then they're only doing a job for this very fact. But I have worked on it. I have honed and polished that to a fine skill. 25 years. I had one member of the press not many months ago in relation to the South Bank project saying, "This is a disgrace. I don't understand what you've said. And what's more, you haven't given us a summary of your summary." And this is mistreating the press. Well, much as all living sorts have my concern and my attention, but you have to draw a line somewhere. I would just like to say, and I don't know how he is, but perhaps you can tell me, I wish Sam Stevens was here. Is he a lot better? Good. Well, that's just a moment for Sam Stevens, because Sam would have carved me up by now. The last point of the business about trying to avoid too much understanding of what we're about until we've done it, is that this ignorance on the part of others actually acts as a superb bulwark to ourselves, to our operational patterning, because we do not feel that we have to justify the sources on which we draw. These will be detailed in more staggering boredom tomorrow evening. That is, that just where, in fact, we find it useful to discuss things with people. We have very little exchange with other architectural firms. Indeed, I have very little exchange with other architects on matters of architecture. Very little. And I have not felt the hunger pangs yet. Finally, and this is where I'd like to stop, which I think has a social, I mean, it was an awful cheap, that title, I do agree. Tonight's talk, drag you out here. We're trying to, increasingly, to avoid any involvement in jobs in which we admire the end products by others. And that is very difficult, but it's essential, and I think this is something which it doesn't matter too much because of the social immediacy of food and indeed clothes and possibly magazines. It matters more in architecture, and we're constantly, I hope, steeling ourselves against getting too thrilled by photographs of wonderful oil rigs. It used to be space stations, and it's very tricky not to get seduced by this, but on the other hand, they're doing it quite well. So it's not so much the disasters we like, but it's the in-between gaps where, in fact, the relationship of societal patterning as to what should be done anyhow by others for them, by us for them, is coming up in a far more critical level of questioning than just the, again, rather loose, heart in the right place, I think, indictable through slovenly thinking, business of, community architecture, or the business that actually anyone can do anything anyhow as long as we sit down and hammer it out. What a lovely turn of phrase. That's well good. This we are cautious about because we're often assumed to be part of it. We're not. We're interested in the gaps where architecture has not been seen to be at all useful as yet. And these gaps are, or have been, I think in some instances, filled, and there's little browning evidences of it on the wall and in this book. But that is what is driving the office to the next 25 years, which start tomorrow, and which I would really like discussion on, if not tonight, tomorrow and Friday. Thank you. Thanks. Any questions or points? I mean, this is the valuable time. Non-electronic audio-visual exchange. Well, I suppose we will look into whether we can do it under plain cover by post in future. And you all had to put clothes on to get out here.
Why didn't you actually mention Victor Cecil by name?
That's interesting. That questioner over there has referred to a man who is a brigand of a chef, but who actually does. It is extraordinary actually because it's jokingly called Hungarian food, but this restaurant has over the years caused people to congregate, and it isn't for the comfort, or indeed for his well-known charm, wit, and politeness. But for some reason, that restaurant has caused all sorts of people to use it for more than just food. Now, that is something, back to that element of fun, back to that business of using a bridge not just across the river, but to get that awful excitement that it might crack, but oh boy, you're relieved to the other side that the bridge was there anyhow. You know, there's something in that sort of element in architecture which I think is extremely important function of architecture. Now, Victor has somehow found that, Victor Sassy, as a function in running a restaurant, because it isn't the quality of the food, it isn't the comfort of the place, is it?
No.
So I'm glad you raised that question. And as I believe there's no ban on advertising restaurants, but no, actually I'm not going to. It would be awful, it would ruin if it was filled with architects. It's far too, it's awful. You wouldn't like it.
Cedric, who burned down stove?
Well, yes, this is rather interesting. It wasn't just that I have this fantastic appointment to look after oak trees for the next few hundred years. And there's one thing about a tree. One, you know, it takes an awful long time to grow, but the other nice thing, you know you can cut it down quickly. Now, this is what appealed to us. Because we, as you know, have for years suggested that the greatest obscenity of the first quarter of the 21st century, even more than dogs soiling pavements, will be seen to be compulsory education, whether private or public. The idea of compulsory education will be seen as an obscenity, a crime against the mind and the spirit, whether from embryonic stage or from what the Royal Navy now decides is 4 months to 18 months is the most formative time of your brain, or whatever period. But certainly for year 1 to 18, 16 does seem obscene. So this is why we leapt at this task of looking at oak trees in an ex-ducal house, which is now a school. However, I felt it needed a bit of zip, this space, a bit of zip. And it took some time, not quite as long as the GLC, but some time to confirm my appointment, during which there were 2 drug cases, 1 burnt-down pavilion, and a spoof bomb alert for a minor member of the royal family who was turning up to give an art prize or something. Now, I couldn't match those 3. I mean, they're on their way. I mean, that is a marvelous sort of book for next year's, you know, what's it called? Catalogue. You know, just look what we've managed this year, even without a consultant architect. Drugs, fire, bombs, and royalty, you see. So this has put me in a very difficult position, except for things like Dutch elm disease, you see. And there is this new oak weevil creeping in. So thank you for asking me about that, Alvin. Another thing is, that was the other thing, that they let someone have a thing, game fair. So they shoot. They can't shoot game because too many people are out there. They shoot clay pigeons. So they shot these clay pigeons over the lake. As a result of which the lead content of the lake was such, 5 of their 7 unique Chinese swans turned their toes up, literally. Now, I said I was with Des Wilson at the time, and we said, well, you know, I mean, it's all very well Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and things, you see, but where do you draw the line? Must be. And so this, I'm glad Alvin raised it. This is something that is engaging our attention enormously. Yes, thank you. One of our new lucrative appointments.
Sir, you referred in your talk many times to your office with affection, obviously.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought that you could do without it? Or whether you would like to do without it? Oh, you must have thought that. Could you do
Yeah, I have thought of that. That's very interesting. And I couldn't. And funny enough, even when it's two people and me, those two people, those telephone numbers, that added distortion of time that three of us can achieve in a way for my benefit, if one's being selfish, not financial benefit, for my ease of patterning, and that space, and the fact, I mean, it's a very interesting question, because I do think of it. I sometimes think, I wonder, you know, whether I couldn't, because one of the things I have, one of the actual dependencies I have, and has become more so as various computer services have become more available, as various drafting methods become more available, as I am surrounded by copying offices that will do things far cheaper than I can do by hiring a machine, things like that. The fact that I have enough space to keep records badly but accessible to me on 4 floors is invaluable, because I can do myself test runs at funny times on what we've been thinking about. And I couldn't do that on my own because I could not do, and in fact, I think I rather pride ourselves on our retrieval system, which is, in a way, it's really a sort of steam age. But no, I couldn't, but I have thought about it. Now, whether this was, I mean, you may, on looking at this exhibition, think, well, blimey, I wish he had, you know, done without it. Because, but I certainly couldn't have done an exhibition like that, because, funny enough, this really is the tip of the iceberg. But the direction the iceberg was in before that tip was cut off and hung up on the wall wasn't determined by me. It was determined by those 4 people I mentioned earlier tonight, who could come in and look at the stuff, and I could spend the time showing them, because I had an office running as well at the same time. And I couldn't have done that on my own. And I find this a great tool, you see, as well. So I have thought of it, and I couldn't. No. I think I would probably, I would finish up, I would finish up as a consultant or something to another firm that I admired. You know, perish the thought. I might even be made a partner. You know what I mean? And then it'll all be easy. But I don't want anyone else to change my... I've never changed the heading of my notepaper, as people know, and I'm not going to. And I don't want any discussion about it. I like these questions. They're not the ones I was thinking of. More. This is the best part.
I was interested in your emphasis that the age of your office remained the same while you become older.
Yes.
Now, I deduce from that that as you started at 24, you're unlikely to employ many people at 50. But now being nearly 50 yourself, I would assume you might possibly be depriving yourself by not having any colleagues with whom you could discuss things on equal terms. I appreciate you don't want to have partners because they interfere with your decisions. And I'm surprised you don't find it useful to back the ball to and fro with people of your own generation.
Yes. Yes. Well, I am glad you're interested in that. I don't. No. I mean, no. It's a very good point, but it comes back to the point I was making, that I don't speak to people of my own generation about architecture, although they're architects. Very few.
What about engineers?
They never speak to me.
What about newbie?
Yes, what about Frank? Come on.
Right. Frank Newby, first time, one of the first of many lucrative jobs fair to offer him. We agreed to meet at the AA in the bar He had, in fact, lectured to me through Samueli having a heavy winter cold once, and I'd sat at Frank Newby's feet. So I knew what he looked like, and it was a very exciting job, and I was all excited waiting for him at the bar. And he shot in, looked right round, looked right through me, looked round the bar, and went off, and that was it. That was our first meeting. So I think in some way, we've maintained this sort of balance. But it is interesting. The answer is that I may be missing out, but I prefer that testing. I mean, one wonderful thing at the moment, in the office, there is someone who is very skilled in a completely different field and packed it in. And that is actually weaving and fabrics. However, she also, because I suppose she's always standing next to those grinding, electronically controlled yet mechanically operated looms in Halifax but made in Yokohama and things like that, she can disintegrate our Canon copier and mend it. You know, I mean, don't let them know, because I'm sure there's a maintenance clause or something. I mean, so varies somewhat, but at the same time, people in the office are coming in, because I'm always there so early, there aren't even free Australian magazines on the pavements at that time in the morning. They're coming in with Lamb and Intercrud and Midweek and Miss and Girl and Yuck and they're mild and you know, now that I think, I mean, that is something, I hope Banham's written an article. I mean, the free mags now, I mean, because of my bleeding heart, I immediately dropped time out for the villainy of Eliot and bought City Limits. Keep the old GLC going now. I wouldn't buy any of those magazines now. I have these free ones. And half during the week. And this whole culture, half of it is something about Australia. But, I mean, they're marvelous. Now, that is really what Bucky was talking about. You see, it was Fuller was talking about. He said that really, when rapid communication is worth its salt, it won't cost anything. And that's a sign of when, in fact, it's working. Those magazines, I mean, okay, someone pays for them. I mean,